I'm Anthony Scaramucci, and you're watching The Hole.
Welcome to The Hole. I am Rob Sprance.
I'm Lori Levine. Sorry, I'm used to the person being
here. Welcome back, everyone, on our election night, post-election night special, which just feels like 148-hour election night. We are joined by Noel Casler, who did an episode of ours a while back. He worked for Donald Trump on The Apprentice, on some of the pageants. He had incredible stories about Trump and his experiences with Trump. So I couldn't think of a better person to join us. He's also become a good friend. Noel, welcome.
Thanks, Rob. It's great to be here. Hey, Lori, great to see you.
So I think we're feeling a little better now than we were last night. As of starting this, I just took another check here. We're still at the same place where Biden's at 253 now. I believe he's holding leads in Nevada and Arizona. And if he holds those, then he becomes the president of the United States.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
if he takes like Alaska and one other state, and he's over 300. So I think they're pretty confident that they have the votes they need at this point.
Yeah, I think so too. Although it didn't look that way yesterday. Lori, she worked at the polls. She was a volunteer at the polls, which was awesome. And she was there all day. But for some reason has decided she cut herself off from all news since yesterday. And only a few minutes ago, before we started, did she know exactly what was going on.
Yeah, and so I worked the polls up in the Bronx, in a very diverse district, 74% Hispanic district. And all I'm seeing is immigrant first-time voters come in and they're just saying Biden to me, and I'm just bringing them over. So I feel great. I'm feeling like everything is going really, really well. And then I had no signal. I was in a basement gymnasium. So I thought everything's going well. And then when I went upstairs and I saw some of the tweets and then things my friends are sending me, and it's going very badly. So I just stopped watching. I just didn't want to know anymore. I felt like it was going to be 2016 again. I have not, before I spoke to Rob about 7 minutes ago, I just thought Trump was pretty much the president again.
Wow.
So I'm coming to terms with this. I don't know what states went which way. I mean, I know New York went blue because I worked the polls. So
yeah,
you're welcome.
Thank you. You're in a good place. I mean, and thank you so much for your service. That's really heroic work, and people really showed up this year, and it's wonderful to see young people at the polls. I've been voting since 92, and it's usually like, your grandma and like your librarian, and there's nothing wrong with that, but there's something about infusing democracy with youth that gives a vitality that, we need in this country. And I meant to say Arizona, not Alaska. Obviously, Biden didn't win Alaska. But, it's probably wise that you didn't watch last night, because it was sort of an act of political theater more than it was an actual emergency. In 2016, we had like a car crash on our hands by 8:30 p.m. and we knew that Trump was winning, and it was a shock to the world because it was in opposition to all the exit polls, as everybody well knows. Right. Last night was something different. He clearly should have had a resounding defeat, because that's what somebody who killed 250,000 Americans, and locked up children in cages deserves. We hoped all of our countrymen would come out and send him packing. But that didn't happen. Half the country did support him, but it wasn't as close, I think, as the media portrayed it. Like it's very addicting to watch MSNBC and see everybody get scared and stuff.
They were very morose last night. They
right.
Were. I'm watching CNN too, and I'm watching John King is tapping the board, and at one point it was just him just constantly going back and forth, going, but calm down, but calm down. Like, he's telling everyone to calm down. The guy on MSNBC, I don't know who it was. It was like he was fired up on meth, and he's figuring it out. Like, he's tapping everywhere. I was like, I can't watch this guy. He's making it worse. He is. But as when I went to sleep last night, I was not confident. They kept reminding us that the ballots are going to start coming in, for the next day for all the mail-ins. So things are going to start to change the next day. But I didn't think, Lori was so right. When we saw Florida go, I was like, uh-oh, here we go again. Here we go again. And, I'm glad you're with us, Noel, because I want to get into, I know you have worked with him so much and get into kind of the psyche of what he's going to do, because he's already starting to do it.
Yes.
But I want to thank everyone who's joined us so far. We've got about 500 people already. The chat's going crazy. Just keep sending us your questions. I'm going to try to get to them, and we'll try to throw them up on the screen so that Noel can answer. Lori if you have any questions for the polls, anything like that, just throw them up on the chat. We're gonna try to get to everybody as we can. But one of the things that I noticed about last night that made it a little different is that when you started to see some of the small counties that they were showing in the differences between 2016 and now, there were bigger gaps for Biden, and he was closing a lot of gaps. So what did you think, Noel, of this fucking dog and pony show he put on in the middle of the night, which frankly, he's been setting up for years? I mean, this has clearly been his intention all along. But for those of you who didn't see it, he came out and said, "We won. I demand that they stop counting votes." Which to me is the equivalent of, I'm a Steeler fan. The Steelers are up 21-0 at halftime, and they come out and say, "We're good. Let's not play the rest of the game."
Right.
So were you watching that live, Noel?
Of course I was. Yeah, no, I was up till 3:30 in the morning or something. And that's what I expected. And right before I came on the air, he tweeted, "I hereby claim Pennsylvania and Michigan and these others." I hereby claim a house on Further Lane in East Hampton, and Olivia Munn and $1 million. But what you saw in the middle of the night is the guy I know. And that's what I expected to see, and that's what's different. In 2016, he wasn't president. He didn't hold any office, and he didn't think he was going to win. And it was
he also didn't have these charges looming over him. I mean, he could be arrested.
Exactly. Excellent point, Lori. Excellent point. He had nothing to lose in 2016. Now he has everything to lose, and he has prison looming for himself and his children. So who I saw at 2:30 in the morning was who I expected to see. He was clearly doing the same stuff he did in The Apprentice. He was snorting. He snorted through that whole press conference. His upper lip was numb. It was worse than I'd ever seen it. He was gacked out of his mind. And
imagine his diaper.
Well, just for those of you who didn't see the previous episode with Noel, he has a heavy Adderall addiction where he crushes the Adderall and he snorts it. And he was doing that before takes of The Apprentice, correct?
Yeah, he would do it when he had to read anything, a cue card or something, because he's basically dyslexic and he hasn't treated it. So public speaking is scary to him. So that's his drug of choice, stimulants, to make him feel in control, because he never dealt with his learning disability, which is no shame, but he just never dealt with it since he was a kid. So it makes him feel powerful. Last night, he had Don Jr., who's a huge cokehead. He was the first guy to walk out puffing his chest with a thumbs up. He had Eric, who's a drug mule for him, essentially. So all those guys, and they kicked the press out of the East Wing early in the evening. You couldn't come back there unless you were invited. Even with your green pass, which usually gets you into that part of the White House, they were like, no. Just like our parties in The Apprentice where you'd have the Hells Angels and stuff. It was like, so God knows what was going on. But, my guess was he was facing ego death, which is what he fears. He doesn't so much want to be president. He just declared a lid today at 5:30. He doesn't want the job. He, like you said, he wants to stay out of prison. but he does not want to be humiliated. And I believe
being seen as a loser.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, something very telling for those of you who saw him speak when he visited the RNC headquarters. He spoke and he sounded, granted, look, the guy did, he must have did a shitload of rails because he went from one rally to another, to another, to another. And I can understand why his voice was hoarse, but he seemed very somber. And he seemed like he even had a comment where, winning is easy, losing is hard. And when he said that, it's like the first little crack of humanity I've seen in the guy. Like, I don't know whether he was just so tired that he had a little flash of honesty, because when it comes to campaigns, they always say, watch what they do, don't watch what they say, watch where they go. And he was going to red states at the very end. And that is just something that it told a lot. So they had a feeling that they were going to lose. Now, again, this election is not over. It could, states could flip in a matter of an hour, and then we'll be having a completely different show. But at that moment, he was acting like he clearly knew that he was in trouble.
Absolutely. I mean, he knew he was defeated because, as much as he acts like kind of an idiot in person, and he is a stupid guy, behind the scenes, he's a little more calculating, and he does have some semi-smart people around him. So they saw the numbers. As you just said, he was visiting states he shouldn't have been visiting.
He went to New Hampshire. Like, why would anyone waste their time on those electoral votes in the last couple of weeks?
Exactly.
I almost think part of it is he wants it. Look, I have always said, and now let's take the whole pending prison from New York, Southern District, out of the equation. I have always thought that his exit strategy was, I think he wants to create his own right-wing network, like an OAN, that's specifically targeted to, his people that pretty much believe whatever he says, be it a QAnon conspiracy and all of those different things. I really do feel like that's what he wants to do. So a lot of those rallies and this whole saber rattling at the end is not just a chicken whose head's been cut off and they're going to flap until they're dead. I do think that he's going to appeal to his base a lot, because he's going to use them in the future where he winds up next.
Absolutely. I mean, that's very astute, and that's what he's doing. As I said, he doesn't really want the job, and I think he learned in these final months that, like, Rush Limbaugh is not going to be around forever. He was doing a bunch of press recently, and he realized, wow, I can get $100 million contract, sit down at Mar-a-Lago, do a radio show every week, have all the same sycophants kissing up to me, still go to the rallies, have Don Jr. announce in January, and we can still get the campaign fund grifting going.
Sell tickets,
sell T-shirts, not just tickets, sell MAGA hats and stupid flags to put on your pickup truck and stuff. But that is what he wants. And that's what this is about. People keep texting me like, should I be worried? No, this is political theater. He's setting up the aggrievement. He's setting up the villain. They stole it from me. They took the election. I was the greatest president, and the deep state wouldn't allow it. And that's going to be even more lucrative for him out of office than it will be as, serving a second term.
Yeah, for sure. I still think the Southern District of New York has something big on him. Maybe, I don't want to pontificate and then you sound like the conspiracy theory people. But what's been happening, I want to break down a little bit this pattern of events that brings him to where he's contesting things, right? So as everyone knows, quite some time ago, he started talking about how mail-in votes are bullshit and they're not going to be good, and all his people should go to the polls and make sure that you vote the day of. Don't do mail-in voting. Then the GOP legally tries to prevent, and has in a lot of the states, prevent them from counting the mail-in votes until election day, which makes no fucking sense at all. Like, if you have the votes, why wouldn't you go ahead and do it right then and there? So that's the next step. Then election day comes, all the people he told to show up, right? So then what happens? All of the mail-in ballots are not counted yet because the people at the polls are dealing with the people coming in. Lori's seeing people coming in. They're not dealing with the counts of the mail-in votes yet. So they knew a long time ago that what was going to come next was the influx of Democratic votes with the people who, like I used a mail-in ballot. I dropped it off, but I got an absentee ballot. A lot of people I know did. The only people who didn't were his supporters because he kept telling them not to do it. So they almost set the stage. And in a weird way, the strategy, it worked brilliantly to a point because, yes, he looked like he was winning at 2:00 in the morning. No, they didn't count even a fraction of all the mail-in votes, which is bigger than ever before. And now he can claim that all of this, because he's tweeting it all day today. They found votes. We're finding, what a coincidence. They're only finding votes for Biden. This is such a calculated move for so long. And he is going to challenge it. We always had that question, and I think we talked about this last time you were on, Noel. The question was, will he go away? Will he just accept it? He's not leaving. He's going to get dragged out.
Absolutely. And, part of that strategy that you didn't mention was that Louis DeJoy, and that's not conspiracy. He really dismantled mail sorting machines and slowed down the mail delivery this summer. And we see the effects of that. And while it probably helped Trump in South Florida and in North Carolina, it most certainly helped some of those Senate races. Your Lindsey Grahams, your Susan Collins. A lot of those races really don't make sense if you look at the exit polls, especially Jamie Harrison and stuff. So that mobster mentality of the ballots are just going to fall off the back of the truck, which is why he told his supporters not to do it, not to send them in. If you were a real politician, that's like somebody offering to write you a check and you're like, no, just give me the cash next time I see you down the road. If somebody's willing to vote early for you, you want that. You don't say, no, wait till November when it's dark out at 4:00, in a pandemic, when you can drop it.
And then on top of that, we know that Jared met with Kanye West a couple weeks before Kanye announced he's running for president. Now we're seeing, I just heard 60,000 people wrote in Kanye West on their ballot.
They did?
So they knew exactly what they were doing, that it would take votes.
In what, across the country or one specific state?
Across the country.
That's
so far.
Insane. I've worked with Kanye a lot. We won't get into that, but good God.
You can.
He doesn't realize that they're using him.
Yeah, he is so out of his mind,
He almost seems just like another version of Trump in a lot of ways.
He is, he's just mentally ill. The last time I worked with him was at the 12/12 benefit concert, the Sandy concert. And I was the AFTRA coordinator, and we were going to make a film out of that, to raise extra money for all the flood victims in the tri-state area. So everybody had to sign an AFTRA, SAG-AFTRA release, and I had to run around and get the Rolling Stones to sign it and Springsteen. It was a pain in the neck gig, and I chased Kanye all night long. Who muscled his way onto the thing. We didn't even want him there because we knew how difficult he was. And we're like, look, this is a charity. It's not really your kind of gig. But he insisted on coming and, we let him. But I chased him all night. And finally his manager was like, look, he's not going to sign the thing. Who's kidding who?
Wow.
And we couldn't use his performance, because he wouldn't just sign a paper that still, got some $750 and allows us to use his performance,
That's crazy. Yeah. So, we had Allison Quinn on. She's an actress. She was in the show Sons and Daughters. She was in Curb Your Enthusiasm. And she did Kanye West had a pilot that for HBO that they gave him a pilot for. And she did a scene with him. And she said that, he just basically told her within the first 5 minutes, I'm the greatest rapper of all time. It's
Trump. It really is like Trump.
No, he's insane. My favorite Kanye story was when he first came on the scene. He was on Charlie Rose, and Charlie's interviewing him and he's like, hey, what else would you want to do if you weren't in hip hop? He goes, oh, I would have been a basketball player, and Charlie's like, well, I'll bet you're glad you chose music instead. And Kanye's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, well, obviously you're 30 years old and 5'10". You're not going to be a basketball player. And Kanye's like, no, I would still be the greatest basketball player on earth if I did it tomorrow. And Charlie's face was like, this guy's clinically insane. You know,
Dave Chappelle.
And I've met Kanye, 5'7", 5'8".
Right, exactly. I was being generous because I'm 5'7" and I don't like to.
Yeah.
Dave Chappelle had a really great story, and I'll make it quick, but he was screening his second season of his show, and Kanye was just getting started as a rapper. And he invited him to a screening. So Chappelle is there in his house, in his screening room with a bunch of people, and Kanye's next to him. And the phone rings, and Kanye answers the phone. He's like, hello? He goes, I can't talk. I'm with Dave Chappelle watching season 2. And then he's quiet, and he goes, because I'm dope, and I do dope shit. And he hung up.
Oh, my God. That's him. That's the guy. You know the Pearl Jam story, right? I don't want to get too, Pearl Jam. Bonnaroo. Let me tell that real quick. Sure. So he was scheduled to like play Bonnaroo. This is like 10 years ago or something. And when he was at the height of his thing, and he looks on the rundown, and he had this really complicated set with all these lights and everything. So they made him. He was going to go before Pearl Jam, so there would be enough time to kind of do a loadout on his set. And he's like, "Who the F is Pearl Jam?" Like, I'm not opening for these assholes, I want to go last. And Eddie, it was backstage, like where the trailers are. Eddie was sitting like 10 feet away, Eddie Vedder, and heard him. So Pearl Jam went out and played their longest set ever. They played for like 4 hours. And Kanye's set began at like 3 a.m. His whole lighting crew quit because they were just like, screw this.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, fuck him. Anyway.
I love Eddie Vedder.
Speaking of fuck him, let's get back to Trump. So, I mentioned that, you have another episode that you did with us. There's tons of, I noticed what you probably experience all the time. Now, you on Twitter, you speak out every day against Trump, and you share stories. You're very brutal on Ivanka because you've worked with Ivanka personally. You were her handler, right? You worked with her all the time, right?
Yeah, the last 3 seasons I was in charge of Ivanka, which includes Jared.
Oh, so it's like a package deal, so you have to watch both of them?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so here's a question just came in. So from All Good Name Are Gone. Okay, how much Adderall did Trump really take during The Apprentice?
A lot. Trump has been addicted to stimulants since the 80s. Adderall is the late 90s or whatever when it was invented. Before that, it was diet pills. He's always done cocaine, and meth is like his party time drug. Adderall is the maintenance high. That's what you do at work. It's cocaine when you're at Mar-a-Lago on the weekend, when you're doing Fashion Rocks, where he did it in the back of a limo with a bunch of models at 2000, a show I was on. So the Adderall is just like, if you're just smoking weed all day just to get through the day, but then at night, the scotch and the blow comes out. But he would do it whenever he had to read off a cue card, which is basically like anytime he was there. I did the finales, and you do a run through. So like one time the word arbitrage was on a cue card, and he's like, what is that word? Like, he just freaks out. Like, you guys are setting me up, and he shakes and everything. He gets rageful. You've heard some tell of that from the White House, but I mean, he loses his stuff. He goes ballistic. He'll incontinent, he'll soil himself and shake with rage. And then he has to go off set, snort the Adderall, and come back. And that's when they'd clean him up and stuff. And you've seen it fly out of his nose in the last couple of months.
Yes, I was going to say that too. After you did our, and I don't know if it's coincidence or what, but after you did ours and a bunch of others, I started to see the Adderall allegations flying around from.
See the whiteness. Everyone started making fun of the white under his nose.
Yeah, and there are videos of him talking, and you see a particle of white anytime he's at a podium shoot out of his nose. There's multiple different speeches where they're showing that. Now, sometimes, again, this kind of drifts into conspiracy theory land, and I hate to sound like the other side when they say Hillary had MS because she had those glasses and all that bullshit. But you had told us long before those clips were coming out that the guy had to do it every time he was going to read or give a speech because it amps him up. Don Jr., I don't think there's a question from anyone that Don Jr. is on coke, because that guy in the last month it's almost like those final scenes of Scarface, like when they're closing in on him and he knows the time is running out. He's just fucking so amped up. Like, the guy's clearly on coke.
Clearly. I mean, he's in his Rick James final, locking himself into the living room with the crack pipe stage, and he relapsed. He was dry when I knew him. But the addiction is, it's no laughing matter. There's no shame in having a substance abuse problem. I have that in my family. I've dealt with those issues myself. And, if you get help for it, it's fine. It's a medical disease, but if you're in denial about it and if you're in active addiction, it's a deadly situation. So Junior was sober for not sober. To be sober, you have to work a program and deal with the mental things that are causing you. Junior was dry. They call it dry. So you're not using a substance, but you're still not fixing yourself. And then he relapsed when his dad, became president, because I guess he started drinking in Ireland. There was tale of him and Eric in a pub in Ireland, and they ran out on a bar tab, of a couple $100. Yeah, as his dad was president, while they were grifting tax dollars, visiting his Doonbeg course over there. But anyway, so he relapsed. If you quit, if you have a drug and alcohol problem and you quit for a period of time, you think, well, I haven't done it in 10 years. If I start doing it again, I'll be cool with it. It doesn't work that way. You pick up where you left off, So what you see in him is clearly somebody in late stage addiction. And I'll shut up, but what that tells you about the family that allows him to still go on and speak on his father's behalf every night on Fox News. If Lori was doing that, you'd call her up and be like, Lori, you're going to rehab. You're not going on TV every night. But that shows you how little they care for each other. It's a snake pit. It's all just about serving each other's needs and their father's needs. And Ivanka and Don Jr. hate each other.
Really?
Yeah.
So can you touch on that a little bit? Did you see them get into any fights or arguments over things?
They keep their distance. I didn't see them fight, but it's clearly there's no love lost. And Don Sr. hates Junior. He despises him. If you saw the clip the other day where Junior tried to hug him at the rally, It's a great clip. It went viral. Lincoln's Project did a thing on it. And Don Sr.'s like, no, I'm not hugging you. And it's just like you see the wounded scrump kind of slink away. You know?
It's got to really affect Junior that Jared gets everything.
Gets all the jobs, exactly. Gets to go to the White House.
He's seen as so smart. He's going to fix the Middle East. He's going to be in charge of COVID. And Junior's back in New York doing stuff for Trump International.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
No, and Ivanka has Trump's ear. As I told you last time I came on, she runs the show. Trump wants to get high. He wants music to play when he walks in the room, and he wants to hit on all the women. He doesn't have a long game. Jared and Ivanka want to rule the world. They're looking out for building an empire and consolidating their power. And she has her father's ear, where he hates Junior. He's hated Junior since he was a kid, But
remember in Ivana's book, she said, I want to name the baby Donald Jr. And he goes, but what if he's a loser? She wrote that in the book.
Yeah. Oh, God. Well, a lot of questions are coming in right now. The chat is definitely heating up. So I'm going to throw a couple up here for you, Noel. I just want to thank everyone again for joining us. Please click that subscribe button if you're on YouTube. If you're not, go to thewholepodcast.com, click on subscribe. We'll have plenty of other interviews. We have tons of interviews on there. We just had Jeremy Piven on, Tim Robbins, Mark Cuban. So check out any of the other episodes as well. But yeah, there's a lot.
My dad thinks Noel is the best.
Yes. Lori's dad thinks you're the best guest.
Oh.
So here's what this is kind of plays into it. Does Ivanka really respect her dad, or is she just using him? This is from Chris Griner.
She's using him. She would throw her father under the bus in a heartbeat. And I remember one time her and Jared were standing there, and a PA came up with the sides. Do you know what sides are? They're like when you have some lines and stuff, they give it to you printed out on a piece of paper. Mm-hmm. So they said, here's your sides, and I gave them to your father as well. And she turns to Jared. She's like, oh, you gave him sides, huh? I'm sure he's reading them right now. And they're laughing because he can't read, And the disdain that they were just like, ha, 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 ha. No, she hates him. I mean, he sexualized her, and I'm not saying he abused her. I don't have any proof of that, but he sexualized her from a young age.
Oh, for sure.
I worked on the pageants when she was 16, and she was a host, and he's making her give her lap dances and stuff. We've all seen these pictures. He would bring her to the VMAs as his date, and she was 15. He would bring her to John Casablancas, the big modeling pedophile, essentially. He brought her to Casablanca's elite models parties as his date when she was like 11 or 12. We've all seen those pictures.
Well, we've seen pictures of Epstein and Ivanka and Trump together. There's multiple pictures.
Yeah, well, Epstein was Trump's protege. Epstein built a lot of his operation on what Trump had done with Trump Model Management. Trump Model Management was bringing girls out of Eastern Europe after the fall of the Soviet Union and basically using them, as escorts for high-end businessmen in Manhattan. That was Trump's scam, is that he'd have these parties at the plaza and he'd get a bunch of 17-year-old girls from, Slovenia or whatever in the room, and they'd be doing drugs, and he'd be like, take her in the bedroom. No one's here. You're among friends, and a guy would do it. And then Trump would be like, hey, you guess what? I was running video when you did that. Now that building permit I need for downtown, you're going to give it to me or your wife sees the tape. That was Trump's MO. And that's how Epstein sort of got into that trafficking situation. And that's why, I don't want to get into the weeds too much, but that's what Epstein's mansion was on the Upper East Side. And that's why there's so many powerful people involved. And that's why we never saw what Epstein had. And Epstein never went to trial,
Yeah. Well, here's a question I get a lot. A lot of people on the last episode were commenting on this. I know that you did an interview in People Magazine. That's actually how I have come to know you. But the question from Jane is, why won't the media touch all of this? It's so obvious. It's a mob thing. The media fail us. So that is a question I get a lot. Like, why didn't other news outlets pick this up? Why didn't CNN pick this up, or other, even like MSNBC or whatever it may be?
Right. Well, it's a complicated question. I mean, CNN is run by Jeff Zucker, who's the guy who gave Trump his contract at The Apprentice. Jeff Zucker was the head of entertainment for NBC when Trump was on the air. So he's not going to run that piece. It is out there. There's a guy named James Zirin who was an SDNY prosecutor who wrote a whole book about Trump's cases, his 4,000 lawsuits, and it's full of mob anecdotes. When he was building Trump Tower, he was doing it, for Fat Tony Salerno. The Teamsters were on strike that summer, and Trump was the only guy who got concrete delivered because he gave a penthouse to the Teamsters' girlfriend when it was completed. So there's mob stuff all throughout his history, and he's basically untouchable. That's the other thing I tell people. He ran casinos in Atlantic City, and the guys who'd put in the carpeting or the brass railing or something would get stiffed. He wouldn't pay them at the end, right? You don't do that to people in South Jersey unless you're a made man.
Yeah.
Because anybody could have met a guy in a diner and gave them 10 grand and be like, this guy owes me money. Can you send him a message? But nobody touched Don. So he's his dad was building, for Genovese crime family. And when Trump moved into Manhattan, his father said to him, that's not our territory, because that was Gambino territory. And then Trump went into Manhattan and started building with the Gambinos. And then Giuliani comes along, who's basically like his partner to this day, who's in Philly today lying for him.
Yeah, that was the lineup he had there. He sent Eric, Trump, Giuliani, what's his face? There's another one. He had Eric, Trump, Giuliani, and not Stephen Miller. Who's the other guy?
Corey Lewandowski.
Corey Lewandowski, yeah.
But and can I just finish real quick with the mob stuff? So basically, they run out the Italian mob and the Russian mob moves in, and then Trump gets in with the Russian mob and then becomes basically untouchable. So the reason the press doesn't talk about it, because that's not an easy thing to connect dots on. And that's a lot of stuff where it's keep walking, we're not going to do that piece. The same reason they don't touch on the drug addiction. I would have gone on any of those shows and talked about it. I'm an eyewitness. I understand they need 3 more people to write about it in the Washington Post or something, but you have enough anecdotal evidence off of what I've told you, Yeah.
Well, also there's that 13-year-old girl. It's
That's
public
real.
record. He
Right.
raped a 13-year-old girl. She went to police. She's obviously been paid off, but it's out there. You can read the transcript.
Exactly.
And no one talks about this.
They don't, and it's a good point you bring up, Lori. It's an ugly subject to talk about. It's something people would rather not talk about. Everybody who worked on The Apprentice None of those people, from the cameramen to the grips to whatever, would ever trust Trump with their teenage daughter. I'd be like, would you let? No, you would. Everyone knew who he was going back to the model days, to the pageant days. But he's a billionaire, and he surrounded himself with NYPD. Keith Schiller and his security detail were retired, New York City cops, so he's pretty untouchable. He's pretty corrupt at a pretty high level, and people don't want to mess with that. And I'll say one more thing, because now the election's happened, and people kept asking me, how come Michael Cohen denies the drug use, right? That was a question I'd get on Twitter. So for any of my followers, because he owns taxi medallions in New York City, that's why he denies it. Even retroactively, he's not going to admit he was party to any kind of illegal drug use. Or any of the money laundering or any other things he said he knew nothing about, even though he was the RNC finance chair, when Trump took office. And I'll tell you this, I'm not attacking Michael Cohen, but if Trump had brought him to DC like Michael wanted, you never would have heard from Michael Cohen. He would have been Trump's fixer in DC. He came out to serve himself, and he sort of overstated his role. I never saw him at The Apprentice. He was never around at Celebrity Apprentice, so he's on probation. He's not going to be like, yeah, he was also doing blow all night, It's just not going to serve him to say it. But people always ask me that question, and I always would just pass, because I appreciate Michael's effort to expose what he can about Trump, Yeah,
and, to go back to the young kids, two things. First of all, that 13-year-old, that's not rumor. There are court filings, and he tried to get Barr, which, by the way, has completely disappeared. If you notice, I think he saw the writing on the wall and bailed. I'd like to think that that's what's happened, because Barr is completely nowhere to be found.
Yeah, he's putting his case together for Noel.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Just kidding.
Those guys, that's an extraction. They just come in the middle of the night and put a hand over my thing, and I open my eyes, and next thing I know, I'm in Fiji somewhere in a dungeon. But
sorry, Rob.
Hey, you want to go after Barr? Let's do it, because Barr's dad was Epstein's buddy. Barr's dad hired
got him the job at that school
at Dalton, without a college degree. It costs $50,000 a year to send your kid to Dalton. You don't hire people that don't have Ivy League degrees, let alone a teacher with no college degree. And They were running buddies, And then Bill Barr's father, Donald Barr, was the headmaster at Hackley School, where I grew up, up in Westchester. And they used to call him Chester the Molester, So he was not a good dude. And he wrote sex novels. He wrote science fiction sex slave novels, right? And on the cover of these novels, I'm not making any of this up. You guys can research it. There's a cover of a sex castle where he would do all these things to these teenage sex slaves, right? Epstein built a replica of that sex castle on his island in the Caribbean.
Wow.
Okay. And when Epstein got the sweetheart deal with Acosta, right? When he was getting ready to accept that deal, he had a tile extractor and an industrial shredder sent to that island, UPS by boat or FedEx by boat, right? So he got rid of all the evidence before he took that sweetheart deal where he was allowed to leave prison. You guys, your viewers have probably seen that. But so Barr goes way back with Epstein, and Barr had a lot to lose. And Barr didn't raid that island or Epstein's mansion, number 11 East 71st Street, until after Epstein was dead.
Wow. Yeah.
You know what I mean? That doesn't make any sense. And where's that evidence? Where's the evidence from his ranch in New Mexico?
Yeah.
So that's compromise, and that's why these guys feel above the law. That's why Bill Barr's arrest me. He said to Nancy Pelosi, did you bring your handcuffs?
Yeah, but I mean, why do you think he's disappeared? Because the last we heard of him, he was supposedly going to have this groundbreaking report about how, Obama spied on him, Hunter Biden, and basically tie everything in a nice Bill Barr bullshit bow and release it at something. But Barr said, no, we're not going to have this ready on time. And ever since then, I have not seen him, except for, when he Kellyanne Conway was breathing COVID into his mouth. Right. At that
The judges.
Announcement. So he's totally gone. You think he just sees the writing on the wall, distanced himself, or is there something else going on?
It perhaps is a little more nefarious. There
Maybe
is
the
talk.
buffets opened up in DC.
Yeah, he could be face down in a bowl of cream spinach at the back of the Ruth Chris in Crystal City, and the waiters haven't found him yet. But
we've all been.
But no, the more nefarious thing is it was Barr who put together that gang of troops that we saw this summer. The people that tear gassed the folks at Lafayette Square. Those were unidentified Bureau of Prisons sort of warriors, perhaps Eric Prince kind of type dudes that he brought in from around the country. Apparently, Barr has been, flying around the country, meeting with law enforcement heads in the last few weeks. He was photographed in one place, I believe, St. Louis. But so he was probably putting together something for the unrest that they were hoping they could foment. Because a part of what's going on now is they're hoping people take to the streets and start rioting, before the count happens, so they can say, hey, look, we got to clamp down. We got to do martial law. Antifa, if you let Biden win, your streets are going to get burned. That's why. And nothing happened. I was in Manhattan yesterday. I mean, everything's boarded up. You guys
not only did nothing happen, it's like a hay ball is rolling through Broadway. Like there's no one out. People are depressed. It's just gloom. It was beautiful out today. There was about 7 people out. And I live in a gay area. Like people are partying here. Yeah. Nobody's partying right now.
That's sad.
The narrative is people are boarding up everything because if Trump wins, they're going to riot. And I think they're boarding up everything because if Trump loses and doesn't go, it's going to be a much different, think about it. He just erected a second wall around the White House. Like if Joe Biden does wind up winning this election and becoming president, the first thing he should do is take all of those walls and fences that they put up, which is such an authoritarian thing to do, to take those all down, because they pretended they put it up to protect him so he could hide in his little bunker, and meanwhile he's talking about Biden hiding in the basement. He was hiding like a little bitch.
Absolutely. I'm glad you said that. I used to work on Capitol Hill when I was a kid in the late 80s. When I was in my late teens, I was a bike messenger. So I would deliver documents for the Congressional Budget Office all over DC. And I used to deliver to the east gate of the White House. And back then I would ride my bike up to the guardhouse that was like 10 feet from the door. It was the people's house. It was accessible, and that's how it's supposed to be.
George H.W. time?
Yes. Yes, exactly. And in Clinton's years, they had to close off Pennsylvania Avenue because lunatics started kind of dive bombing it, but they just made it pedestrian, But the point is, it's the people's house. That's not Trump's house. And like Rob said, he's getting into this warlord bunker mentality, and he would burn this whole country down and sit in there and snort Adderall all night and rage tweet while we lost everything, just to save face and just to spite America. Because here's the other thing. He wants to punish people now. Trump is a vindictive dude. He doesn't let a slight go. And he's been embarrassed.
How mad he is that Obama still hates the man.
Yeah, I know.
And I think he hates that Obama just laughs it off.
Of course. And I did Obama's inaugurations. I've met Obama. Like, he's the coolest, most competent dude you'll ever meet. You saw his shot the other day, the basketball, and he's just like, that's what I do.
Yeah. It's just like, and you see that, and then you see the contrast of who you have now. All right, so let's get to another question here. Here we go. Will there be more whistleblowers like Miles Taylor? So for those of you who don't know, Miles Taylor worked for Trump. He was Homeland Security, was he?
Yeah, he was a deputy Homeland Security director.
Deputy Homeland Security director for Trump, and he is the one. He's come out. He's the one that was anonymous. He wrote the anonymous op-ed. We are the resistance on the inside. He's the one who wrote the book. And I should also sneak this in that Miles Taylor has agreed to be a guest on The Hole, and he'll be coming on in the next week or two once the election chaos dies down. So maybe in 3 years from now, I don't know. But Miles will be joining us soon. But that's a great question. Like, do you think other people are going to start coming out at this point, or is it pretty much it's already done. Like what more could be done about it? Unless Trump winds up winning the election, then it's a whole different story.
Yeah, good point. I mean, he's not going to, let's not even put that in the ether. But yeah, if he ends up winning, probably more people will come out. Miles came out, when it counted. Like, people are giving him a hard time, but I'm glad he's coming on your show. He did speak out. He did write a book. He goes into detail about some things, and that can only help. You need people to do that. People give Scaramucci a hard time. Scaramucci's a smart dude who speaks out. That's what you need. We're Americans first and foremost. It's cool if you change your mind, and want to talk about it and seek redemption and make it right. That's part of growing up. I respect people who do that. So, I make that distinction because I think now you will see a lot of tell-alls. The kind of stuff I talk about, I only saw Trump like at, Celebrity Apprentice finales, so only a few days at a time over a period of 6 years. And look at all the stuff I have. Right. Can you imagine the people that are living with him in the White House? When he
imagine his White House butler. Like, he has a personal butler. Do you know what that man sees?
I can. And Trump put up to that point. Trump is the only president to put a lock on his bedroom door in the White House. As soon as he moved in, he insisted on putting a lock on the door. You don't get a lock because, in the case the Secret Service has to run in the middle of the night. Trump's like, no, I'm putting a lock on that door. Just tells you about who he is and what he's doing behind the scenes. But yeah, imagine what those guys are seeing with Trump under pressure. When I saw Trump, his job was like to figure out if like Little John or Meatloaf had a better pop-up shop in Times Square. You know what I mean? It wasn't a lot of pressure. And now it's like they're telling him stuff that he has no idea even what they're talking about.
Or take the time to even bother listening to it.
Right.
Because as Miles said in the book, and he's come out and said, I never met Miles, I don't know who he is. Meanwhile, there's tons of pictures of the two of them. Right,
exactly. I think it was Miles who said that Trump asked for ice cream when they were giving him the first briefing true. In January, they said, this coronavirus thing is coming. It's airborne. It's deadly. It's going to kill everybody. And they're telling him this. And he's like, hey, you think we can get some ice cream in here? So there'll be tons of stories like that. Somebody like Miles who put his name on the line and had a real position, I respect. Somebody who's going to just try to make a cheap tell-all in a couple of years, I don't. And people kept telling me to write a book. I didn't write a book. I didn't want to make a dime off of this, and I don't care if people believe me. What I tell them is judge for yourself. Look at the guy. Don't take my word on it, but do some research on what active addiction is. The resentment, the rage, the self-centered fear, and tell me if you see that in Trump's behavior, and tell me if that's what you want in a leader. That's why I spoke out. I'm not trying to make a buck off of this. I walked away from my career to be able to talk like this,
Noel, do you wonder how he has not had a heart attack yet?
I don't, because I used to tour with rock bands that did the same kind of thing. So 70-year-old drug addicts are like my job. I've seen it. Some people just have that disposition that they just don't die. And some Len Bias dies at 18, the first time he does a line. It's it's a crapshoot. It's like the people who smoke until they're 95 and eat bacon sandwiches every day. And they,
I mean, you toured with Crosby, Stills, and Nash. I mean,
I did. I'm not, some of those guys, crew could be watching this show since I shared it on Facebook. So I don't know if I necessarily had those guys in mind, but there's an indestructible man or two in that band for sure. And that's a gene. Some people have that, like the Keith Richards thing, and in all honesty, people always use Keith as an example of that. Keith put down hard drugs like 40 years ago. Keith lives not far from me in Connecticut. He's like a country gentleman. He's like the nicest, mellowest guy,
And he now looks like the youngest of the Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
I think he just petrified himself where the rest of them got older. He just put so much drugs in his body that he basically embalmed himself a lot.
He did.
So, but it's so now, I've been checking from time to time to see if any of the numbers changed. Nothing has changed. Let's just play this out. Let's assume Biden wins. They call it tonight. They call it tomorrow. Let's even take it another level, and let's even throw Pennsylvania in there. Let's say Pennsylvania, he comes back and the electoral distance is insurmountable. What do you think he winds up doing now? Clearly he's going to try to challenge. Clearly he's going to try all of this stuff. And, I think he stacked the Supreme Court with this specific thing in mind. That's why we wanted to rush Amy Coney Barrett in. They wanted to have the majority in there in case he did this. I will say, though, as much as we all gave Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch shit, anytime something he sent there went there, they did do the right thing. I just think that once they're there, they don't fucking need him anymore. And they do, Gorsuch, I put him at a different level than Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh, I still don't trust him. Gorsuch, he was a good attorney. He's got all these guys are a little too right wing for me, just in general, and a little too much religion involved in decisions. But if you take that out of the equation, he has gone to the Supreme Court for a bunch of stuff, and he keeps losing.
Yeah.
So the two people that he's already put in there to stack in his favor, I wouldn't be surprised if he takes it to the Supreme Court and they just tell him no.
I think you're right. I think they definitely would, because they're almost in a better position without him. They have Mitch McConnell. Let's assume, I guess they're holding on to the Senate, right? So they have a powerful Senate. They have a weakened president, because no matter what happens, half of the population is going to believe Trump's BS right now, that Biden stole it and was illegitimate. McConnell will block legislation. You won't get like more coronavirus relief, for example, because McConnell will want a weakened president. He's going to not want him to succeed like he did to Obama. You still have Lindsey Graham. So they got what they wanted, which was a conservative packed court. And they can send Trump packing because, see, Trump's trouble. He's not slick. Those other guys are annoying, but they're slick, So they can still repeal Roe v. Wade. They can repeal the ACA. They can do all the kind of things they want to do, uphold Citizens United and all that kind of stuff without Trump being the distraction that he is. So I agree with you, Rob. I think that they would deny him. And I think that's what will happen. I think, he's going to like saber rattle for the next few days and milk it. And I think McConnell or somebody will come down and say it's time to pack it up, at which point I think he'll bail to Mar-a-Lago. I don't think he'll serve out his term. I think he'll get on the plane, go down there, negotiate the OAN contract or whatever, the Free America Radio, get some of the good stuff sent over from Doral, call up a couple, Ivanka lookalikes and kick back.
I'm not as optimistic as you in this case. I think he's going to sabotage as much as he possibly can before he leaves. I hope he just packs it up and just says, I don't even want to be president anymore. There are theories, too, that he would instill Pence at the very end so that Pence can absolve him of some things some of these cases. But these cases are state. So there's nothing really a pardon can do to help him in this case. But I don't know. I think he's an incredibly spiteful human being. And I can absolutely see him trying to write as much legislation as possible to prevent Biden from doing anything.
That's what I think.
Change what he's done. I don't see this man in no way, shape, or form going to the inauguration. I don't see this man writing the letter that every president writes to the next president. The part that worries me is he's going to drag out this election shit, and they are going to spend absolutely zero time on the transition team to bring Biden up to speed, because he'll spite him and just be like, I'm not telling him nothing. Let him figure it all out. Meanwhile, the guy doesn't even know anything because he barely listens to his briefings or anything. But, there's going to come a point, let's hope to God, that, Homeland Security, the Joint Chiefs, that all of these people can step in and assist Biden, because I don't expect this administration to help him with anything. Obama had to do it. He had to sit there and smile next to him, and he did it because of the Class Act. Every president before him, George W. Bush, welcomed Obama into the White House. They even became friends because of it.
And George H.W., who was a one-term, did it for Clinton.
Right. Like, I don't see him doing any of this because he's a little bitch.
You're right.
He is the ultimate snowflake. He's the ultimate. They want to throw that term around. He's the ultimate snowflake. Every time somebody says something about him, he rips off, he rants on it. Like, when are you presidenting, dude? Like, when is that happening? Because I don't see any of it.
Right. Well, that's a great point. And you're absolutely right. I hadn't thought about that, but that's why he like took the civil service protections out recently, so he can like do a scorched earth and fire Fauci and fire, civilian appointees. He'll probably fire the head of the FBI, all those guys that he feels like didn't protect him. He'll probably sell off everything he can in like the Bureau of Land Management, mineral rights to companies and all kinds of stuff. You're right. He'll be selling, Jared will be at the back door like, who wants some secrets, to Saudi Arabia and UAE. And yeah, you're right. They'll grift and steal everything that isn't locked down. And then you're right. He'll leave like a crayon drawing of like, a butt or something.
Of his mushroom penis.
Right, exactly. He'll sit on the copy machine,
He'd break it, that fucking fat ass.
No, are you saddened like I am of how many votes he did get though?
I am. And that's a real awakening for this country to think, like Rob just said, while we're talking about him, 1,000 people a day are dying. There's more people getting coronavirus now than were 8 months ago. It's a raging pandemic. There's people getting evicted who haven't worked in 9 months in the wintertime. There's people lining up at food banks. We're in the most desperate place we've been since the Depression as a nation, and he's still sucking the air out of the room. So, yes, I'm very sad. I'm very, we're in such a perilous position that we do need those adults in the room, like Miles Taylor talked about. We need somebody to say, enough is enough. Because another 500,000 people are projected to die by like Christmas, or January, by the end of January. That's amazing. Like 250,000 people were alive this time last year. Some of them I know. Some of them were famous musicians I worked with. Some of them that were beloved, actors and stage managers. Some of them were just your good people who lived in your neighborhood, and they're not here because of his mismanagement and his malfeasance. So, we're in a time that we can't afford an hour wasted, and we're wasting days and weeks on end.
Yep, and it's going to get worse. If he loses this election, it is going to get worse for quite some time. There's no doubt about it. And there's good.
No, it's going to get worse with Biden. Here's the thing. It's like even when Biden comes in, we got to roll up our sleeves. We're probably going to have to lock down again. We're going to have to figure out a way to get a mask mandate going, because it's all the people that he was telling it was a hoax that are dying now. Hospitals are full in West Texas. If you break your leg in West Texas right now in Lubbock, they're sending you to Tucson, like there's nowhere, and then Tucson's full. Like there's nowhere to go for these people. It's going to be a human catastrophe that's barely getting reported on. So even in the best case scenario, we got some really tough times ahead.
Mm-hmm.
I just saw a photo of a guy at one of Trump's recent rallies before the election, and it said, the back of his shirt said, "My son died from COVID, and I'm still voting for Trump." Like,
I saw it. No, I saw it. And to answer your question more directly, like, yeah, I'm flummoxed and disgusted that many people support him. And here's why I think it happens, because I have friends with these guys on Facebook. Just how like you and I are saying all this stuff about him, they have their own version of these facts that they've been fed by Sinclair Broadcasting and Fox News and Russian disinformation. Like I had somebody today was like, I'm hearing there's 100,000 more votes than there are even people in Wisconsin. And I'm like, no, but he saw it. And that's how this stuff works. Like you see it and then you feel smart because you saw it somewhere. And then you tell your buddy, and then your buddy feels smart because he heard it from you and he gets to say it to somebody else. And then all of a sudden 3 people in, it becomes fact. So they have their own set of facts that they deeply believe, and that's scary because you can't change their minds. They don't see themselves as racist. They see themselves as fighting socialism. They do think, look at the Republican convention. They were like, yeah, there's a room where they take baby parts.
Right.
Yep. And, it's funny, too, if you ever get into a debate with someone who says Biden's a socialist or a communist, ask them, what is socialism? What is communism? Just explain to me what it is, because they don't know, because they just hear it. And, I want to say something about Fox News, because Fox News now is the vanilla of what the disinformation.
Right.
Fox News is like the equivalent of Entertainment Tonight interviewing a celebrity and never asking a tough question. It's a puff piece. It is what it is. And yes, they'll twist things and kind of like even headlines like everywhere else it says Biden's almost at 270, and Fox News headline is nail biter going down to the wire. They don't even mention that, so I get what they're doing, but that's not where the worry is. The worry is the Alex Joneses of the world, the Joe Rogans, frankly, he's become Alex Jones on weed. You've got OAN, which is just there's like 30 Trumpy Bear commercials every hour over there. Fox News is not the biggest issue anymore. They really aren't. They have tons of people watching, but if you go outside of the Tucker Carlson and Hannity and that fucking Laura, and you get those people out of there, and the judge, I can't stand that alcoholic. You get
Pure.
Right, you get them out of there though. You do have some. I flip to the Fox News all the time to see the other perspective and kind of laugh at how they're coding things. If you watch the election coverage, they're not really spinning anything. They had Newt Gingrich on, and he spewed some shit about voter fraud. But when they're covering things, like they were calling the states the same way, they were doing everything the same way. It's these other fringe ones now, Glenn Beck. And all of these guys who are just spreading every conspiracy and QAnon bullshit and all of these other things, like you could almost know what their topic is going to be before it starts. They still say Biden has no stamina and he can barely get through a sentence. That guy just came out and gave a fantastic speech, and it was not selfish. He just came out. He was strong in what he said. He said what he had to say. He articulated it fine. And then you have the other one who's just snorted up on Adderall and rambling and saying.
He's like, I saw him the day before the election saying, I know things about Lady Gaga. Like, you're the president of the United States of America. Why are you talking about her?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So go ahead.
He doesn't know anything about Lady Gaga either. I've worked with Lady Gaga a lot. Lady Gaga's a pretty damn cool person, who from the Upper East Side, went to Sacred Heart. Like, she grew up in a good family. She's a wealthy New Yorker who made a great career for herself. He doesn't know anything about her. He went to see her once at Radio City, during the time I worked with them. But it's and just to his stamina, he would ask for a golf cart to go 50 feet on Celebrity Apprentice,
right.
And like, there's a hotel across the street from the White House, the Hayes, I think it's called, where like foreign dignitaries stay. I'm getting the name wrong, but it's basically right across Lafayette Park. And a tradition for presidents was to just walk. If you had to go meet like the prime minister over there, you would just leave the White House and walk. And I would see George H.W. Bush and Brent Scowcroft and those guys doing it all the time in D.C. When Trump had to go meet somebody there, he got in the motorcade and took 7 SUVs to go around the block. I mean, we're talking 300 yards, So the guy gets winded, like he doesn't like steps, he you see him with a glass of water, he's so.
Do you believe in your heart that he had COVID?
I know. I don't. And I don't want to be a conspiracy. In the beginning, I completely did. I don't understand now. That's something where I'm like, I did a rant. I was like, of course he has COVID. You guys are idiots who think he doesn't. And now I'm like, I don't even know if he did. Like, I don't even know why they brought him up here, why he recovered so quickly. You can't trust Sean Conley, his doctor. I get these letters from like a guy who works in the White House, like he was a dude who was like a pararescue guy in the Air Force. And I can't verify him, so I just kind of read them and keep them to myself. But like that event when Trump, left the White House to go to Walter Reed in November a couple years ago, that was something serious was going down. Like he had a stroke or something like that.
I think they put a stint in or something.
Right? There was, some kind of medical thing was going down that they didn't tell you about. And of course, the weekend before that, he was back here in New York City hanging out with Chuck Zito and the boys at a UFC fight. The same guys he would hang out at the Apprentice after party, if you know what I'm saying, So a week later, he has a heart attack, or a stroke or something because he was in trouble. So in hindsight, it's pretty weird, that he would have had COVID and recovered, but who knows? Did you see that when he got in the car, though, he was bouncing up and down?
No, I gotta rewatch it.
Yeah, there's a video like when he remember on Sunday, he's like, I want to go wave to the nice people.
Yeah.
By the way, I've been to like NIH, which is across the street. That's the largest like pediatric oncology ward in the country. So there was like 6 children in there trying to get better, trying to beat cancer. And like he's got his idiots outside honking horns all night long and screaming. Like the amount of disregard for human life that alone caused was driving me nuts all weekend. And then he's like, I want to go say hi to them. So he gets in the SUV and waves. But there's a video, he's jumping up and down and doing that dance in the back of the SUV. So it's like, it looked like the Joker. It looked like the last scene. It was like the scariest thing I'd ever seen. And I've seen some stuff with him, and I was like, oh, this is a whole nother level. Like, this is, insane. So whatever they were pumping him for, with it worked. But it's a guy who eats cheeseburgers and meatloaf his whole life.
I know.
But like, how does he survive the thing that's killing like Broadway actors and stuff,
Yeah.
Yes, I wonder.
Well, and he got COVID right after the tax information came out, and Melania got it right after her assistant released the Christmas tape. So it's kind of I don't know. The timing's a little.
I agree.
Maybe one day we'll find out, and hopefully when he's out of office and we start finding out, I'm hoping it's January and February of this year. Nothing has changed since we started this, and Noel, I know you have another engagement, so we'll let you go. But it's good to kind of talk out all the bullshit that we think in our minds sometimes, and I try to always maintain a positive attitude at home when I'm watching the news or thinking about it, because I just don't want my brain to go down that dark place. So I don't know how I would have been if things would have been different and it seemed more like last night. I'm hoping that this is it's not going to end well no matter what happens. This is going to be a long couple of months, and frankly a long 2021. But we have people like you who keep us entertained and make us laugh, but at the same time, are not afraid to speak out. You broke your NDA. Did they ever come after you or nothing? No. Okay, well, that's good. Well,
bring it on, Mark.
Don't say that. Don't say that.
Just kidding.
No need to showboat right now.
I'm joking.
What are you doing?
It's over now. You know what I mean? Like. But no, I'm just kidding. Yeah, there's always risk in speaking out, but it's like, look what happened. Look what happened to this country. And like you just said, Rob, we don't have an easy year ahead of us. We have a really tough year ahead of us, but we have to muster our hope again. We have to get positive, because we're going to get through this, and we're going to roll up our sleeves and we're going to start taking care of each other again, and we can't afford despair anymore. We've been down this dark road. It's ending. It may not feel like it. It may be a crazy couple of days, and it will. But sooner rather than later, we have a new chapter, and that's going to be with President-elect Biden, Kamala Harris, and the American people like doing what we can do to put this place back together.
Yeah, and the day one firing of Bill Barr will be one of my favorite moments.
Yes,
for sure, to look forward to. But Noel, you've also become a good friend. I'm so glad that we connected, and you're welcome back anytime at all. And once again, I want to ask everyone, if you like, subscribe to our channel. We have Anthony Scaramucci on. We did an interview with Rick Wilson from the Lincoln Project. We interviewed, was 30 minutes, and he was just like a machine gun and fantastic as well. So please subscribe. Anytime we do live shows or anytime we have a new episode up, you'll be notified. But that's about it. Noel, thank you so very much for joining us. I really, really appreciate it. And I wish you the best. Stay safe for the chaos that's about to ensue.
Thank you, Noel.
Right. Hang out one more second. I'll be right with you.
Thank you.